Okay. Um, well, I thought that I'd share a story about my dad since this month is especially important in my family because my brother's birthday is on November 30th, and then my parents' anniversary, December 8th, and then my birthday is on December 18th. My dad's is on the 20th, and my sister's is on January 26th. So like all of our birthdays are crunched into this like holiday fun packed time. Um, but yeah, so my dad was born in Englewood, New Jersey when it was not as comfortable and cute as it is now. Um, he was named after a jazz musician, Clifford Brown. His dad's name was Samuel Brown, but he wasn't really in his life. He just kind of had his name. He had three sisters and was raised by his mom as a single parent. And it wasn't the best of times. My ama, who my dad's mom, we're not incredibly close. Uh, she has definitely made that a priority for her and in my life to like not have a relationship with us, which is fine. But I mean, growing up for my dad, which was not fine, my grandmother was incredibly intense, and I don't know. I don't know her very well, so I can't speak to how she was as a parent, but I just imagine that it wasn't the best of times. And because of that, my dad became very close friends with this guy named Chris Bosco, who they became best friends in seventh grade. And my Uncle Chris, I call him my uncle now, he's like one of seven kids or something crazy like that. And so they adopted my dad into their family from that point on. So my dad was just like, kind of raised by this really fun, loving, welcoming family. And I think despite how, I don't know, despite my grandmother being who she is, my father still developed into being a very loving and kind person. So yeah, my dad entered into the military when he was 18, didn't graduate from high school, he didn't really have an idea of what he wanted to do. He hated going to school. It wasn't really an interest of his. He mostly just wanted to these are his words, I hope I'm not misrepresenting him, but in his words, he wanted to party and ride his skateboard and hang out with his girlfriend, who was not my mom. So he enlisted in the military, and that gave him the opportunity to travel the world. He was stationed in Germany when he was in his 20s, and that's when he was first introduced to Buddhism. And I think my dad was raised Catholic, and my dad's mother is, I say she's very Catholic, and not like I know what that means, but she goes to mass and she goes to church a lot, and she has extremely Catholic views towards a lot of things, even though they're contradictory to who she is as a person. But anyway, yeah, my dad found Buddhism in his 20s, and he moved back to the States, and even though he was still partying a lot at this time, he was seeing that he kind of wanted to make a change in his life and settle down. And it's weird saying that because my dad was probably making these changes when he was 22, and I'm 26 now, and that seems so insane to be considering starting a family and settling down and making some normalcy out of your life in that sense. But he did that, and he met my mom. They had a blind date. I think my mom was 19. My mom was from Guyana in South America. She grew up in Pomeroon, on the banks of a river on a farm. And she moved out of Guyana when she was 18 to Beijing and lived there for a year. And then she moved to the UK and lived in London for a year. And then she moved to New York. And then she went on a blind date with my dad and hated him. And then for some reason hated him, but went on another date with him. She said that her cousin convinced her, but I don't know. And then I guess from there they fell in love. And it was a very fast relationship. From what my parents say, it was instant, that they knew they loved each other. and my grandmother despised my mother because she was a foreigner, and she frequently told her that to her face, and would say that my mom was only marrying my father for a green card, even though that wasn't true. And despite the immense amount of hatred that my grandmother threw towards my parents' way, they still got married and loved each other for 18 years. And I mean, I don't know. I'm not married. I don't know what marriage is like. But I can say that my parents are great parents. They really tried their best to give us everything that we could ever need. I can say without a doubt that we never really needed anything. We weren't like the belles of the ball, but you know, we got to go to Moody Gardens every once in a while, and my parents still got us Christmas presents even though we were raised Buddhist, and they tried their best to go out of their way to make sure that we were loved, and that if there was something that we were aspiring to do, they support us to do that. And I feel really lucky to have that from my parents. And so, yeah, one morning, I was 13 years old. I remember waking up and hearing my mom like screaming, like, you gotta put on clothes, the paramedics are coming. And I remember I was like 13, so I was like, why would I not have clothes on? Like, what are you talking about? But nonetheless, I like, got out of bed, and I remember seeing my dad, and he was on the ground, and he wasn't moving. And I was like, okay, something's not right. And my mom was super frantic, just trying to like corral us together, because it was my sister there. I was 13, so she was... No, I guess my sister wasn't there. She would have been 20. So it was my brother and just myself and my mom and my dad. And the next few minutes was just like a whirlwind of watching my mom trying to understand what was happening with my dad, and then me trying to understand what was happening with my dad, and just seeing my brother shell-shocked, not really sure of who to help and what to do, and seeing the paramedics coming in. And I remember at the time, because I was 13, and even like my 13-year-old self knew that my thoughts were so stupid and silly, I was like, oh my God, who's gonna walk me down the aisle if my dad dies? Like, what? This is so stupid, and I'm in my pajamas, and these like hot paramedics are in my house, and I felt so silly having all of these thoughts while my dad's like literally dying on the ground. And I remember watching the paramedics whisk my dad out of our house. My mom left with them. It was maybe 7 a.m. and my brother and I had to go to school. And luckily enough, my parents were always very strategic with where they moved, so we typically walked to school, so it wasn't a problem that my mom wasn't there. But I do remember looking at my brother and just being like, pretty sure Dad's dead, but you know, we're not gonna jinx it for now, but we'll just go to school and go about our lives. So to give some background on what happened, my cat wants to play fetch. My dad was extremely athletic. Like, this dude went to the gym every single day. We drank fucking juiced carrots on a daily basis. It was disgusting. And he used to like study jiu-jitsu. And so he was sparring with his friend in their like garage, and his friend kicked his knee in a way that my dad had to have surgery. And so my dad was like 40 years old, and he was super fit. He had surgery. The surgery went great. After surgery, the doctor suggested that he didn't really need blood thinners. And then about a week, maybe less than a week later, my dad had a heart attack in our house, and he died in the ambulance outside. And so that morning, it was the last week of 8th grade for me, and I was sitting in my math final, and I took my test, and I asked my teacher if I could go outside for a second, and she was like, yeah, that's fine. And so I went outside, and I saw like a couple of my friends sitting in the hallway, and they were like, hey, what's going on? And I was like, oh, nothing. I I think my dad died. And they were like, what? I was like, yeah, I think my dad died. And obviously they thought that was weird. And I like also didn't know how to articulate how I felt. So I just kind of walked away and went back to class. And then I got a note from the counselor that my mom was there. And that was kind of like the fuck. Like, yeah, he definitely died. There's no reason my mom would be here if he isn't dead. And so I had to meet my mom and my brother in the counselor office and go through that. And then, yeah, I don't know. It's like, I never feel like I have an appropriate, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like my friends will have people in their lives that die, and I want to be able to give them some kind of support, but I don't really know what to say. My dad dying was so abrupt and bizarre that it literally swept the wind up from under me. I mean, I was 13 years old. My dad was a military man. He was very strict. I mean, he was a Buddhist, but he was very conservative. He was raised Catholic. I think he still had lots of like residual Catholic guilt. He also expected a lot out of us. He was very athletic. He wanted all of us to be very athletic. We were also, supposed to be the best in our class. We had to write essays every summer. Like, we wrote an essay every couple of weeks. My dad would make me write book reports all the time. It was like go, go, go all the time, being the best students possible. And as a teenager, like, I hated that. Duh. Like, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to hang out with my friends and like go to the park and do stupid stuff. But my dad had no time for that shit. And I remember, like, the night before, my dad said something to me, and I was like, oh, God, I hate my dad so much. And then the next day, he died. And I was just like, fuck. And for a while, I felt a lot of this, like, guilt that it was my fault that he died, because, I was a teenage girl and, like, didn't understand death. And, yeah, so the next few days after my dad dying was a lot of people in and out of the house. Just trying to be there for my mom. I think that was the biggest focus for me. I put a lot of my emotions to the side of how I felt because, I don't know. Like, yeah, I lost my dad, but my mom lost, like, her best friend. She lost her partner. Something I, like, never would be able to understand. I don't, hopefully not. But anyway, yeah, so, I mean, flash forward over the next few years, because they're mostly just really sad. It's mostly just like trying to make sure my mom was okay. She was fired from her job like a month after my dad died for some ridiculous reason that wasn't her fault. It wasn't her fault at all. And I had to watch my mom lose her husband and her job within a month's time and just try to tell her like it's okay as a teenager. And that sucked. So eventually my mom did get a job. Everything went back to normal, to an extent. And I graduated high school when I was 17. It's kind of a big deal for me. I was the first in my family to graduate. It was a very big deal for my father. And I thought from that point on I was going to be pretty all right. I had succeeded, to some extent what I wanted to, but I was totally not addressing the fact that I was incredibly depressed, and I had kind of put my dad's death on the back burner of my mind. I was much more comfortable addressing the way everyone else felt than addressing how I felt. And so after I graduated from high school, I kind of didn't have this clear idea or standard of who I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. I felt like everyone had these expectations of who I should be, and I had expectations for myself as well. But at the same time, I had this just like total fuck you attitude towards the world, because how could I not? Like, this major portion of my life was taken away from me for no fucking reason. And I had to try to make sense of a world and this like everything happens for a reason attitude when I couldn't. And so when I was around 15 or so, I started drinking a lot. And when I was 17, I started drinking even more. So a lot of my friends were 21 by that time. And from about, I would say 17 to 22 was like just getting absolutely, completely wasted every single night. To the point where now it's like, I'll go back and I'll read stories that I've written about it, and it honestly seems like I'm writing about someone else, like someone else's life. And I won't go too in depth about it because that's not the point of the story now. But yeah, it was just drinking so much so I could just sleep, so I could just go away and forget that any of this was happening. I mean, that feeling of numbness that alcohol brings is like irreplaceable. But with that being said, it was like waking up every single morning fucking sick, losing friends and losing sleep, and just turning into like a monster of this person that I wasn't meant to be, but I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know what to do with any of my feelings. And when I was 22, I stopped drinking. Yeah, alcoholism actually runs in my family quite deep. My mother's father is an alcoholic. He died of alcoholism, and my father's father was an alcoholic. We think he died of alcoholism. He lives somewhere in Virginia. We don't really know, but yeah, it was kind of like obvious that I could be an alcoholic. My parents actually never drank. I didn't see my mom drink alcohol until I was 18, and I never saw my dad drink alcohol. I think they were both very aware of what it could do to them, but I was just like, fuck it. Anyway. So yeah, when I was 22, I stopped drinking, and I just tried to rebuild my life and be like the best version of myself that I could be, as cliche as that sounds. I had found myself in rock bottom. It was absolutely my rock bottom, and I gave myself this ultimatum of either getting sober in a year and getting my shit together, or like, okay, that's it. If I like end up drinking myself to death, if I end up like, just drinking in a hole for the rest of my life, then fine, that's what I deserve. I gave myself a year of time to get my shit together, and if nothing worked, then like, fine. But fortunately, things did work, and fortunately, I did find myself again and began to like piece together who I was and what I loved and what I found to be important in my life. And through this, I'm 26 now, so it's been 4 years since like gathering my shit together again. But like this month, bring it back to this month, I graduated from college this month, and it was my first in my family to graduate from college. And I felt like the entire time I just couldn't help but think about my dad. And I don't know, I felt like throughout a lot of my life I would sit and ask myself, like, especially when I was super drunk, like, how disappointed would my dad be in me right now? And I felt like in this moment I knew that my dad would be so proud of me, because I had to go through a lot of shit, and it was so fucking awful for a really long time, of like working full-time and going to school full-time and getting internships and volunteering. And all of this hard work had finally, I felt like in some ways, paid off. And it's made me think about my dad a lot. And so as I'm looking towards, my future and the work that I do, say primarily work, well, my goal for the rest of my life is to work within environmental communications and to help people understand what's happening in their environment. I think that it's critical to be having these conversations, and if I can in any way facilitate them, I would feel honored in a lot of ways. I think as I've gotten older and as I've developed my writing, my goal has always been to reach someone in some way and to make their life a little easier and a little simpler and maybe a little more comfortable. And so as I do move forward, I think about my dad, and I think about his emphasis on appreciating nature and value of community and being a core figure for people to rely on. That's what my father did. He was that person for all of his friends, and everyone loved my dad. I mean, his funeral was full of people. And yeah, I hope that I can be that person that my dad was for so many people, and I hope that I can continue to like make him proud. And yeah, I think that's it.